was a frigid winter morning, and New York City bustled with activity as people hurried through the cold streets, each lost in their own world. In the midst of the busy day, Donald Trump was traveling in his car on his way to an important meeting. The windows of the vehicle were slightly fogged up, but the skyline outside remained sharp and clear, with the city's towering buildings reflecting the weak winter sunlight. As the car drove past a crowded street corner, something caught Trump's eye. A figure was sitting on the sidewalk, bundled in a torn military jacket with frayed edges. The man sat motionless, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but beside him was a sign that read in bold, capital letters, "I am a veteran, please help." The sign immediately struck Trump. His expression changed from the routine determination of a man with places to be to the concern of someone who had just been deeply moved. Without a moment's hesitation, Trump instructed his driver to stop the car. He turned to his security detail and said, "I need to know who he is, now." Stepping out of the car, he walked briskly toward the man sitting on the cold pavement. Passers-by slowed their steps, some eyeing Trump curiously as he approached. The man, who had been looking down at the ground, noticed Trump's approach and instinctively flinched, unsure of what was happening. His eyes met Trump's for a brief moment, but the hesitation was palpable. Trump softened his voice, knowing this wasn't just any conversation, it was a human moment. "Hello?" Trump said gently. "What's your name?" The man looked up slowly, his eyes tired and wary. "My name is John Miller," he replied, his voice a little shaky but strong enough to be heard over the hum of the city around them. Trump knelt down to John's level, meeting his gaze directly. His face was serious but not stern, attentive, listening intently to whatever John was about to say. John's hands trembled as he pulled them into the warmth of his old, worn-out blanket. He looked away for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then, with a deep sigh, he began. "I'm a veteran," John said, his voice cracking slightly as the words came out. "I joined the military when I was 22. I served in Afghanistan, did what I was supposed to do. We fought, we survived, but every day we lost a little more of ourselves. I lost my friends, and I fought with everything I had to stay alive." John paused, his eyes distant as the weight of the memories seemed to settle on his shoulders. "But the worst part," he continued softly, "wasn't the fighting. It wasn't the war. It was coming home." His voice dropped to a whisper. I came back and realized that nothing was the same. The country that I fought for, my family, my friends, none of it felt like home anymore. Trump remained silent, watching John intently as he spoke. John struggled to keep his emotions in check, his face creased with pain. "I was injured during one of our missions. A blast. A moment that I'll never forget." John's eyes filled with tears. "But the injury didn't just damage my body, it shattered something inside me. When I came back, there was no one there. My family, they abandoned me. I became a burden to them. I lost my job, my house, everything." Trump's expression was one of empathy. His brows furrowed as John spoke of his pain. The words were heavy, each one cutting deeper than the last. John wiped away a tear, continuing, "One day, I found myself on the streets. No home, no family, no friends. Cold, hungry, forgotten. The worst part is that nobody cared. People just walk past you, like you're invisible." Trump listened without interruption. He could feel the sorrow in John's voice, but also the hint of something deeper, hopelessness. John continued, his voice shaking. "Last winter, I was sleeping next to a man on the street. He was another veteran. He froze to death right beside me. I woke up and he was still there in his blanket, cold and lifeless. He was a Vietnam veteran. I called the police, but it was too late. It haunts me, thinking that one day someone might find me like that, forgotten, freezing to death on the streets. Trump's face tightened as John spoke, his mind racing. This wasn't just another story. This was real. A man who had once risked his life for the country, now stranded in a nightmare of loneliness and despair. John's voice faltered as he finished. I don't even know why I'm still here sometimes. Why I survived. Trump took a deep breath, his mind made up. He looked John directly in the eyes and spoke with unwavering certainty. John, he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. A man like you should never have to go through this. You fought for this country, and now it's time for this country to fight for you. John's eyes widened, and a glimmer of hope flickered across his face. You're really going to help me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if not fully believing what was happening. Trump nodded, the weight of his promise clear. Yes, John, you served, and now it's time for this country to serve you. This ends now. We're going to make this right. Without hesitation, Trump pulled out his phone and immediately called his assistant. Book the nearest hotel and get a doctor on site, he instructed. Then, turning to his bodyguard, he added, get a hot meal for John. Minutes later, the bodyguard returned with a steaming bowl of soup and a sandwich, placing them carefully in front of John. The warmth of the food was almost too much for John to handle. He hesitated at first, but then took a bite, his eyes filling with tears. He said quietly, his voice breaking. Trump stayed by his side, offering words of encouragement and ensuring John was taken care of. After an hour, a sleek black SUV pulled up, and Trump gently helped John into the vehicle. As they drove toward the hotel, John felt the first true glimmer of comfort in what had seemed like an endless stretch of darkness. At the hotel, John was shown to a private room where a warm shower, clean clothes, and a soft bed awaited him. For the first time in years, he felt like a man again. He had dignity, he had hope, and it was all thanks to a simple act of kindness that had begun with a cold winter morning. The morning after his arrival at the hotel, John sat at a beautifully set breakfast table, still reeling from the kindness and attention he had received. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but it was the presence of Trump sitting across from him that made the room feel brighter. Trump smiled as he placed a folder on the table in front of John. John, he began with a sense of purpose in his voice. I've put together a plan for you. It's not just about getting by today, it's about giving you a future. There's an organization called Veterans United that helps homeless veterans rebuild their lives. They offer housing, job training, and counseling. I'm going to connect you with them, and I'll personally cover all your expenses for the first year. John stared at Trump in disbelief, his hand gripping the edge of the table as if to steady himself. His eyes searched Trump's face, looking for any hint that this might be a cruel joke, but there was only sincerity in Trump's gaze. Really? John's voice cracked slightly, still overwhelmed by the gesture. You're doing this for me, after everything? Trump nodded, his smile warm but firm. You fought for this country. You gave everything. Now, it's time for this country to give back to you. This is just the beginning. We're going to rebuild your life, John. John felt a wave of emotion rush over him. He wanted to cry, but he held it back. For the first time in years, he saw a glimmer of hope. The sense of despair he had carried for so long began to melt away. He finally felt that someone cared, someone who would help him stand back up. Later that day, John met with a representative from Veterans United, an empathetic woman who explained the resources available to him. She walked him through the process of accessing housing, job training, and counseling services. The representative emphasized that the organization's goal wasn't just to offer temporary assistance. It was about long-term recovery, helping veterans regain their independence and dignity. Trump's foundation provided a check to cover John's immediate expenses, including securing a place to live and health care. The support was overwhelming, and John was filled with gratitude. He had never imagined that he would be receiving this level of help, especially from someone who just days ago had been a stranger to him. "I don't know what to say," John whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. "This feels like a miracle. I never thought my life could change this quickly." Trump, who had been quietly observing the interaction, smiled at John. "It's not a miracle, John. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. But you're going to have to work hard, too." "You're not alone anymore," John nodded, his face reflecting a deep sense of gratitude mixed with renewed determination. For the first time, he had a future to look forward to. As Trump prepared to leave the hotel, he stopped for a moment, turning back to John. The conversation had already been transformative, but Trump had one more message to share. "One day," Trump said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "you'll have the chance to help someone else. That's what makes the world better. When we extend our hands to one another, when we pay it forward, it doesn't take much to change a life." John looked up at Trump, his heart full. "I promise, one day, I'll pay it forward. I'll do the same for someone else." Trump gave him a nod, his expression filled with pride. "I know you will, and that's how we make the world a better place, one person at a time." The final scenes of John's transformation were nothing short of inspiring. Over the next few weeks, he settled into a new home provided by Veterans United, a safe and supportive environment that allowed him to heal. He enrolled in job training programs and received counseling that helped him work through the emotional trauma of his past. John found a job at a local company, something he hadn't thought possible just a few short weeks earlier. Slowly but surely, he was rebuilding his life. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. With a new sense of purpose, John continued to heal. He smiled more, talked more, and even started making plans for the future. He had a place to call home, a community of support, and the dignity he had lost for so long. Trump, who had stayed in touch with John, visited him one last time to check on his progress. "You're doing great, John," he said with a smile. "Keep moving forward. The road ahead will have its challenges, but I know you can face them." John, now stronger than he had ever been, smiled back. "Thank you. You saved my life, Mr. Trump. I won't forget it." As John stood outside his new home, ready to embrace the future, Trump's voice echoed in his mind. "Remember, we all have the power to make a difference." And John vowed to do just that. He would pay it forward, just as Trump had promised. The story came full circle, showing how a single act of kindness could transform a life, giving hope to one man and setting an example for all of us.